Hello everyone again. I've seen you quite a few times so far in the last couple of days. Many of you about 5 times, I think, in various sessions. Hello and welcome to the session entitled In Conversation with Ben Watt. And somewhat bizarrely and crazily, this is centred around a conversation with our guest, Ben Watt. Welcome, Ben, to Lemmy. Just a little bit, not wishing to embarrass Ben at all, or actually say things that he's going to talk about anyway, but just a little bit of a preamble. Ben's best known for his 9 albums, 20-year career as one half of Everything But the Girl. But outside of this, as we all know, Ben has also co-founded the seminal club Lazy Dog, curated Cherry Jam and neighbourhood nightclubs, founded Buzz and Fly record label, and released a string of underground house records over the years and remixes. And a decade that spans 3 decades. Ben's currently a resident DJ at BBC 6 Music and a board member of the Association of Independent Music. Away from music, he's written an autobiographical memoir, Patient, about surviving a life-threatening illness. And obviously, given the sheer amount of creativity that comes into, and creative enterprise that Ben's involved in, it's quite amazing. He fits in time to have 3 children, and also apparently does lots of cooking as well. Very good cook, I've been told. So we've been asked that you can give out some recipes this evening as well. So a few production, cooking tips, label tips. We're going to throw it all in. So without further ado, let's turn our attention to Ben. Maybe we can just get things going. So in terms of your early years, I believe your dad was a band leader. Was that kind of the formative aspect of you being involved in music, or do you think it kind of went deeper than that, or were there other things that came afterwards that affected that?
Well, I grew up in a very... I was surrounded by music when I was growing up. I was actually the only child of a second marriage, and I lived in a house with all my half-brothers and sisters who were all 9-10 years older than me. So there was my dad with all his jazz, and then my eldest brother was into quite sort of left field folky stuff like Roy Harper. My sister was into quite sort of druggy Santana, Lou Reed kind of stuff. My brothers were into more kind of mainstream songwritery, James Taylor, Carole King. So I just grew up surrounded by it, and it's all I ever found myself wanting to do. And
I mean, did you find you were fighting for your identity within that as well? Do you think that helped your pursuit of it in the later years?
Not really. It just seemed very natural. I mean, I remember my dad used to come in from jazz clubs late at night. I remember once he came up to my room when I must have been only about 6 or 7 and plucked me out of bed in the small hours, took me down to the living room where he was playing poker with a bunch of musicians, sat me down in front of this. We had a massive mono speaker in the room. Yeah. And there was like Roland Kirk and Count Basie was playing. And my mum coming in at like 3 a.m. and telling him, what are you doing? What are you doing to this child? And my dad just said, I'm giving him an education.
So is that what you do with your children then?
Yeah, absolutely.
Play the Roland Kirk records at 3 a.m.
To the speakers and, yeah.
So, I mean, obviously that's in terms of the early years. Where did it start to kind of gel into some kind of idea that maybe you were going to make a career in this, or was it something that happened over time, or was there a spark moment where you thought, yeah, this is what I definitely want to do?
Well, I was definitely part of the post-punk generation, and that was a huge enabler for a lot of people. I mean, I think, it was the first time, people, sort of youth culture was able to come up and actually make their own music. And, I was a teenager during those years, and it was a very exciting time, the birth of the independent label scene, the club scene, and the feeling that you could just do it yourself. So I think that was a big.
I mean, people talk about punk, and some people talk about like a Sex Pistols gig at the Royal Free Trade Hall, and it spawned all these bands. And I've spoken to people over the years who talk about being at particular club nights, and it's spawning kind of them wanting to be producers or getting involved in that. Do you see similarity with that? I mean, is that in terms of the punk in relation to sort of the club, or was it a continuum?
I'm not really sure. I mean, my experience was just of little local scenes. and they were able to bubble away like little hothouses, sometimes in regional cities, sometimes in the suburbs of the bigger cities, often centered around clubs and small labels. And I think there are parallels, ironically, with what's happening today. It's just that a lot of it is happening globally, centered around blogs and websites and stuff. But there are these little sort of micro scenes building up. But there was just this feeling that that there was a sort of line drawn in the sand in about 1978, and that the major music industry, which had brought us Yes and Pink Floyd and Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin, could just move to one side, and we would sort of step into the breach. I mean, of course, we were all only selling about 50 records, but it felt great, So.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's the vibe that goes with it and the enthusiasm. I mean, and so where did Everything But the Girl come into that kind of picture that you painted?
Well, Tracy was in a band straight out of school called the Marine Girls, based in Hertfordshire. I had a little solo contract as a solo artist. We were doing gigs in and around London. We put out a couple of records on Cherry Red Records. We were both on the same label, but we didn't know each other at the time. And then we both had the opportunity to go to university in the early 80s. And just by complete coincidence, we were going to the same university, which was in Hull, in Yorkshire, Humberside. And it was just the idea of the guy at the record company, Michael Wade, the A&R man. He just said, well, look, when you're going up there, Tracy from the Marine Girls is there, why don't you meet up? And that's how we got together. So we sort of already had sort of incipient, careers starting, and then we met up.
So in terms of, I mean, obviously you're talking about Cherry Red, and it's in some ways kind of a classic independent label. What happened with the move to maybe sort of a larger label, your involvement with that? Because obviously, you became very successful. And I know these things don't happen overnight, but how did the transition happen? How did it feel at the time as well, as a sort of an artist?
I think there was a feeling at the time within the independent label scene in the early 80s that perhaps to make the next step through to national recognition and perhaps international recognition was beyond the abilities of most small labels. And there were a few movements started to basically start relationships with majors, basically, where you retained A&R control, but you used the marketing and distribution power of the majors. And we got caught up in one of those movements. Basically, Michael Way from Cherry Red and Jeff Travis from Rough Trade, a journalist from Sounds, and an A&R guy from a Belgian label all came together to create this sort of super indie, it was called Blanco and Negro. And we took it to Warner's, and Warner's provided the marketing, and we sort of provided the music and the A&R. So that was basically how we ended up making our first album. Ironically, we'd actually recorded it with a budget given to us by Cherry Red, and then there was a lot of contractual, toing and froing to actually buy it off Cherry Red and get it onto Warner's, and that delayed the album's release by about a year, actually. But
I mean, did you find at the time it caused a conflict? Because there's often this accusation that even indies when they get to a certain size or start dealing with major labels in a certain type of way, that it gets perceived as selling out, or somehow that they're in the pockets of the majors. Have you ever felt, did that ever feel like that at the time?
Well, I think it was at that stage that the independent label scene in the UK, as it was at that time, was learning as it went along. And I think there was a great feeling within the independent scene that you should not move over to mainstream distribution. And there was the birth of the cartel, which was a big attempt at keeping distribution within the indie scene, and it was very successful to some extent. It had a lot of drawbacks and a lot of problems, but it did very well for a lot of artists. And certainly I think today, the abilities for independents to sort out their own distribution, it's very easy to do these days. Distribution has changed. It's light years away from how it was when I was first starting. So there's no reason to think that you can't stay where you are.
No, so the idea of selling out is I mean is occasionally, I think some people I guess occasionally get it wrong. What about, when I guess, as I say, you had major success with Everything But the Girl, and clearly, you had success beforehand, and then a track like Missing comes along, and that kind of a certain sort of strata of people, it kind of defined you as a band, really, wrongly or rightly. But also it gave a lot of people were hearing you in a kind of dance music context. What was your interest in dance music kind of leading up to that and before that? And how did it shape what came afterwards?
When we first started, I think throughout the 80s, I think our career as Everything But the Girl already had a sort of momentum and a trajectory to it. So that by the time I became aware of hip hop and house coming through in the mid 80s, we were already on our third or fourth album, and we had a sort of a sound and a definition to what we were doing. And I was aware of it going on over there, but it seemed something that it would be too much of a stretch to sort of crowbar it onto our sound. It was a very raw, sound, and we were by that stage making quite sophisticated records. I think it would have been quite a stretch. And there were some, famous attempts by people to do it. I mean, Paul Weller quite famously made a Style Council album that was a garage record that never came out. And I think the record company just said, "This is."
How many people have heard that then?
Not that anyone heard that. Did anyone even know that? No, there's a lost Style Council album. But I think by the time the early 90s had come around, house music had aged slightly. We'd gone through the kind of rave and the kind of darker days of hardcore. The generation had slightly matured a little bit. And I think as the music evolved in the early 90s, there was a new, just a sort of broader imagination, if you like, I think, emerging on the electronic music scene. I had just at the same time, coincidentally, come out of a long, serious illness, and was re-emerging as a musician again. And I felt very strongly that I wanted to do something brand new. It was quite a life-changing experience, and I thought, well, this is a big opportunity. So that's sort of how we got into it. I mean, ironically, I actually went to New York with Tracy, and we had plans to make a record more along the lines of the sort of Tortoise post-rock scene. And we hooked up with Brad Wood, an American producer, and we were having meetings with him about making a record out in the States. And I kept getting all these phone calls from people back in London going, "You've got to come back, Ben. There's this amazing thing happening. It's just like sort of fast, futuristic jazz, and it's on a Wednesday night at the old Milk Bar." And I went, "What?" And I thought, and I kept getting these calls, but we finally came home. And of course, it was Bookham and Fabio all doing drum and bass on a Wednesday night. And I went down there and I just thought, this is amazing, And I started to see connections that I could make between the sort of the jazzier side of our early sound with the futuristic, front-footed stuff of the electronic thing. And we're sort of mushing around in a period that spans about 4 or 5 years here. But a couple of years before that, of course, we'd recorded a track called Missing, You're Right. And we decided that we wanted to record a track at a tempo and in a key and with a set of chord changes that would really suit a house remix. And that's how...
So it was a conscious
Missing
effort.
was definitely written. The actual original of Missing was... We did a demo of it just to the loop of Break for Love by Rays. That's the original demo on a cassette somewhere at home, just to get the vibe. But we didn't sort of feel we had the chops, if you like, to do it ourselves. So we made quite a sort of mellow, folky, breakbeat version on the album, and then we decided to get some remixes done.
And so where did Todd Terry come into the picture in all of this then?
Well, we had some UK mixes done. Anyone remember Chris and James? Progressive house, sort of mid-90s. They did a mix of Missing very early on. Ultramarine did a kind of left field art house kind of version of it. And our American label at the time was Atlantic, and they wanted a mix primarily just for the US club scene. There wasn't a budget. We weren't a dance act, So we sat down with their dance department and we just came up with Todd Terry, who wasn't actually particularly, in his pomp at that time. He'd put out some classic tracks a few years before, but he was a mate of Johnny's, blah, blah, blah. He'll probably do it for a decent fee. And it was all very low key. And even when his mix arrived, all of us heard it. We didn't all sit there going, this is a number one record around the world. We just went, well, that's quite serviceable. That'll do, It was, it was 4 minutes, 57 seconds, which isn't even long enough for a club track. Yeah.
Did he not finish it, or was it?
Well, he was just banging them out, and I think he just banged this one out. And, that's probably belittling it a little bit, obviously. But he certainly added an amazing edge to it that it didn't have in its original form.
I mean, something interesting. What's interesting, I suppose, it wasn't the album track. It was then that became the single, and this does happen occasionally. And I don't think people realise that it happens quite as much as it does, or certainly used to. How did that then come about? Was it just it got played in the clubs, and then it was like this is going to be a single, or was there some other kind of process involved in that?
Well, it's quite an interesting story. The album that it came from, called Amplified Hearts, it had been out for about, I suppose, 3 or 4 months. It had done respectably well. We were called in for a meeting at Warner Brothers. By then, we were on our 7th album. I just survived a serious illness. The record company sat us down and they said, "Look, guys, you've had a good innings. It's probably
you get the sort of the clock and everything."
I think, we think we might as well draw a line under it. And we said, well, look, just before we leave, can we just play you a couple of things we're working on before you throw us out? And they went, yeah, all right. So we got the tape machine out and we played them Todd Terry's mix of Missing, and we played them Protection that we just finished doing with Massive Attack. And Warner Brothers said, nah, it's not going to work. And that's a true story, and they let us go. But what had happened was Missing had already been pressed up as a blue vinyl promo 12-inch by Atlantic in America, because they didn't all sort of communicate at the same time. And this was already doing the rounds on the kind of DJ underground circuit. And so it was sort of out there proliferating on its own with no marketing budget, because Warner's had sort of pulled the plug on it. And of course, it started to bubble up in the American clubs in places like Orlando, and the gay clubs of the Florida and New York and stuff were playing it a lot. It was played a lot in Ayia Napa and Ibiza. German clubs were playing it. Italy picked up on it. This huge sort of underground support behind the record, largely through clubs and word of mouth, built up, and they were forced to re-release it, and that's sort of why it had such an impact, I think.
Protection as well. You're talking about 2 defining tracks of kind of an era. It's important in that kind of way. Does that say anything, or is there anything you want to say about major labels, if we wish to stereotype them, major labels' attitudes to music or their selection of music? Did it tell you anything new? Is there anything you can relate about it to the audience here in terms of perhaps the way major labels might perceive music? Is it common for that to happen and them to go and not get it at all, or was it just a stupid mistake and they missed it?
I think it's dangerous to generalise. There are some very, very, very good people working in major record labels, and there are some stupid people working in major record labels. It's the same in all walks of life. And in many ways, I am very actually defensive and supportive of some of the criticisms that I think major labels do have to face in this age of, free culture and, the world of the internet.
Yeah, fair enough. So moving on from the era of kind of, Missing and Protection, and what came after that? You've been told by a label you've been with for a long time that they didn't want anything to do with you. Then suddenly the success, comes in another wave, effectively. So where do you move on from that, and how do you connect that to where you are now?
Well, I think, we'd certainly, as a band, we'd hit a bit of a slump in the early 90s, and I think by injecting our music, cross-fertilising it, if you like, with a new sound, but still somehow being able to retain our essence with Tracy's voice and the songwriting, it gave us a new springboard for fresh music, basically. And I think that's what came about in the 90s. We moved onto Virgin. We were getting on extremely well with the people who ran Virgin. They were doing the Massive Attack project, so we were all kind of hanging out with them quite a bit. Ashley Newton and Ray Cooper, who were the kind of mainsprings at Virgin in the mid-90s. And we said, okay, look, we'll come over to you. We still want to retain some creative control. We actually took quite a small advance because we wanted to do it our own way, where we probably could have asked for a lot of money after Missing from any number of labels. But we felt it was quite important that we retained some sort of control. And I just started to make Walking Wounded. That was the next thing. And did a lot of the programming myself on 6 or 7 tracks, and then hooked up with Spring Hill Jack and Howie B and a couple of other people to do the other tracks. And started to get interested in DJing for the first time. And here I was, a guy in my 30s, staring at a slip mat, wondering what it was. And it was an eye-opening experience. I remember Howie B was around in my house. We were programming a track, and I had all my records out on the floor, including half of my dad's old jazz records. And Howie just said, "This is a great selection, so when are you next playing out?" And I went, "What?" And he went, DJing. I said, "Shut up, And he said, "Well, you've got good taste. It's only like riding a bike. Just play some records to people." And I can remember going down to Young's Disco Centre in Kentish Town. Anyone remember Young's Disco Centre in Kentish Town? And buying my first 2 Technics when I was about 34. And a couple of slip mats. And I could not work out what the slip mat was for. I could remember not using the slip mat and pressing start on the turntable, and the record would go whoop, and I was thinking, how on earth do you get it to come in time? Yeah. And it was, and then one day I accidentally worked out what the slip mat was for. But that was, I was 35.
So did you sit at home sort of practicing your beat matching technique? I mean,
yeah,
is that
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's good. Respect for that. I think that's great. So, and when your first gig, I mean, so how was that? I mean, how did you feel? I mean, obviously being used to performing live, and basically a sort of a musician who comes from a live orientated background, suddenly being sat behind decks with some headphones, in a very different kind of performance. How did that feel?
Well, rather stupidly, I was at a party somewhere, and probably had far too much to drink, and found myself talking to James Lavelle, who was at that time running Dusted at the Blue Note. Anyone remember Dusted at the Blue Note? And I told him that I'd started DJing, and I probably told him I wasn't bad, like you do after a couple of drinks. And he said, "Oh, you should come down and play. Come down and play at Dusted." And I went, yeah, sounds great, I'll do that. So he called my bluff, of course, and 2 days later he rang me up. He said, "You're on. I've got a little 45-minute slot for you on Saturday, come down." And I went, all right then. And I honestly, it was just like a trial by fire. I've been DJing at home, like with all the lights on, with my slip mat and everything, And I suddenly went down to the Blue Note, and it was pitch black.
And very loud in comparison as well. Yeah.
Went into the booth, I just didn't know what I think I got away with it on the seat of my pants, but it was, yeah.
I mean, what was your attitude to the music you're playing? Was it, some people are, I'm going to play whatever the hell I want, and because my taste is fantastic, or it's, I'm going to try and tailor it to the crowd? Did you have some understanding of who you were playing for?
Well, I mean, it's ironic given, the history of Buzzing Fly and what it's done in terms of house and sort of techno, deep house. I actually started off being very interested in drum and bass, and that's what I first started DJing. So I was down at Dusted playing, I was mixing sort of old jazz records over the top of drum and bass. That's what I was really interested in. So I was playing like Clifford Brown over the top of Creative Source records and all that sort of stuff.
That sounds pretty tricky to me in terms of making it work.
I'm not saying it was successful, but that was the intention.
So you moved on from that then. So what came after that? You're now I guess you had more gigs in terms of DJing and you know, and more involvement in, I guess, that kind of scene. So how did that turn itself into you being involved in, you know, I guess from there going on to sort of Buzzing Fly, your involvement in clubs, you know, running club nights and that kind of thing, and how did that sort of come together?
For me personally, I think a lot of people will remember towards the end of the 90s, drum and bass, which I'd been very much into, went through a very dark phase. I think a lot of the main protagonists within the scene were getting rightly quite concerned about how quickly commodified the sound was becoming. I mean, it was already, you know, it was a sound bed on grandstand. You know, you could hear Alex Reese being played underneath, you know, nationwide Division 1 football, and I think Krusty
sounds like dubstep, doesn't it?
Yeah, and Goldie and Groove Rider were all thinking, hang on a minute, lads, this isn't what we planned. And I think the sound darkened off in quite a heavy way. And personally, musically speaking, I didn't get it as much. And I used to shop a lot at black markets in London. And in the old days at black market, you used to have to walk through the house section upstairs to get to the drum and bass section downstairs. So I used to hear loads of house as I was going down the stairs. All the time I used to go and buy my drum and bass records, and then I started to linger a little longer in the house section as there were less drum and bass records I wanted to buy. And I started to get on very well with the guy who was the buyer at Black Market, Jay Hannon. We used to talk a lot about the music we liked. We seemed to have similar tastes when it came to the house records that he was into and I was listening to that I liked. And as a joke, we said, let's start a club. We didn't really know each other. It was a bit of bravado. You know, let's do it. And we called each other's bluff. And within about 3 or 4 weeks, we'd set up a Sunday night at the Notting Hill Arts Club and decided to call it Lazy Dog. And that's sort of how it started. And there was quite a bit of rivalry between me and Jay, you know, who could bring the best records in, you know, so you think you're a pop star, oh yeah, so you think you're a house buyer and all this kind of stuff. It was quite healthy.
That can be that. I mean, that tension in a good way can be a very powerful thing, though, can't it?
But we did have quite solid, similar groundings in what we liked, and I think that was the real honesty of the club. That the records we played, we did really like, and we did bring a sound that, you know, London, I think, you know, hadn't had for a while. And there was a lot of progressive house. That new super club had just opened in Leicester Square with the escalator that took you nowhere. What was that called?
Home.
Yeah. And we just thought, right, we're going to go in there. It's going to be deep house music starting at 4 o'clock on a Sunday. You know, yeah, it sounds weird. Come down and try it out. And it was weird for about a year. I mean, it was bloody hard. And, you know, people think it was probably a big success out of the box, but it wasn't. And then I remember going down there. We had 2 guests in the first year. Deep Dish came and played because me and Tracy had done some work with Deep Dish. They were playing at Ministry. I said, look, on the Sunday, just come and do an hour. And they said, yeah, all right. And the word got out, and we got an extra 100 people, 150 people down there. And it was a great night. Jay played really well that night. And I think the word got around that it was quite a good little club. I went down about 2 weeks later. It was always in broad daylight when it started because it was like, you know, 3 in the afternoon. And I used to go down to put the posters up. And I got down there on Bayswater Road. You know, it's where the Notting Hill Arts Club, it's like the main road going into London. And I parked the car up and I thought, bloody hell, that's a long queue for the cash point. And I went, actually, hold on a minute. And there were people starting to queue for the club in the broad daylight. And I thought, wow. And that was the turning point for the club. So we ran that, to spin forward. We ran that for 5 years. And we did, you know, bigger parties at the end and everything. And then off the back of that, I started to get ideas about starting my own label. So.
I mean, just before we sort of start on Buzzing Fly, in terms of, you know, for people here, what's the hardest thing about starting a club night, and what do you need to kind of do to make it work? Are there any kind of just a few tips you might give in general? Obviously, you're saying you kind of started on not a particularly grandiose scale. It was just you decided to do it with someone who wants to do it as well. I mean, is that the best tip you can give, or are there other things that you need to work out when you're actually going to make a club night work?
I think, I don't know, I was talking to John Gilston, who's in the room here somewhere. Where are you, John? Are you here? Yeah. John does all our artwork at Buzzing Fly. We were chatting last week about whether you go into a business, you often go in with one of two mindsets, I think. You either go in with the mindset of a businessman, or you go in with the mindset of starting a fanzine. And I think those are the two different ways that you can start an approach to any kind of label, club night. You know, you either want to make a big commercial success of it, or you just want to do it because you believe in it and you love it. And I suppose everything I've ever started, I've always started from the fanzine love side of things. And if they've blossomed, that's just been good fortune. Some things I've started that haven't blossomed. I mean, I sit here, you know, you read out that thing at the front. I was quite embarrassed that, you know, it makes it sound like everything I've ever done, I've got some kind of Midas touch.
Yeah.
But, you know, I've done a lot of things that have been a load of crap, but it's just you haven't been lucky enough to hear them, you know, so.
Can you share some of those with us at all?
Yeah, I've actually got some just but I think as long as you're doing things with the right spirit and the right heart, and, you know, if you're going to have to play records to 10 people and 3 of them are reading the paper, you might as well be playing records that you like, you know. So
you've got to kind of do it for yourself as well, I suppose, as much as anything.
Yeah,
really.
Totally, yeah.
So we sort of arrive at a Buzzing Fly, and how? I mean, was there a kind of kind of year zero? Right, this is the label. This is all going to happen, and it's all going to come together in one go. Or was it a slow burner in terms of how you came about putting it together?
It all started because it was a Thursday afternoon. I was in Black Market trying to find records to play on the Sunday at Lazy Dog. I couldn't find anything I liked. And I knew I was under pressure because I imagined Jay was going to turn up with 5 bullets in his bag and I was going to get shown up. So I went home and I thought, right, bollocks, I'll do a tune myself. And I went into my studio and I made a track in 4 hours. And it was a track called Lone Cat. And I took it down to the club on the Sunday and I played it, and it got a really good reaction. You only need 3 or 4 people to come up to ask you what it is, and just watch a few of the heads on the floor, and you know it's doing something. So I thought, I know, I'll do 50 white labels, and I'll just hand them out, some of my DJ friends. So that's what I did. I made 50 test pressings. About 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from a guy in New York who works at Dance Tracks. He's got the phone in his hand. He's going, "Hey, Ben, is this you?" I'm going, "What?" "This track." And he's playing this track down the phone. I'm going, "That's Lone Cat, I know that. It's got Watts. It's got Watts written on the label. It's got Watts." I'm going, "What?" And of course, I'd never had experience of being bootlegged before. And someone had bootlegged my white label, and apparently 1,500 had been pressed up, and they'd already gone round the rounds. And I popped into a couple of London shops, and they were going, yeah, this is a really hot record. Is this you? And I'm going, yeah, it's my bloody record. And someone had just put Watts on it. It looked really good. It looked like it would come out of LA or something.
You kind of respected it for what it was, but it was ripping you off, basically.
It was like a sort of stencil, hand stamp, Watts. I was thinking, that's me. That's quite cool, actually, But I thought, well, this is ridiculous. If I've made a record that people like, and it's right in the pocket of what I'm DJing, then I might as well take control of it and put it out myself. And that's pretty much how Buzzing Fly started.
And also, I suppose, a nice little bit of one-upmanship when you played out as well, because you could play sort of your own records and sort of ones that you'd help foster. How did you get involved in getting other artists onto label? I mean, you talk about doing a track yourself. I mean, how did you go about that? Were people kind of handing you tracks saying, once they found out you had a label, they're saying, here, we want to be on your label? Or were you actually seeking it?
I struck very lucky with the first 2 people I approached. We'd been playing a track at Lazy Dog to death, which no one else seemed to have, by these, it was a French-Portuguese trio called Rodamal. It was a track called, what was it called? Doesn't matter, anyway, the name escapes me. We'd been playing it to death at the club. I got in touch with them and said, have you got anything else? And it turned out it was 3 guys, and each one turned out to be incredibly talented. Rocco, Manu, and Alex Santos from Lisbon. And I signed all 3 of them on the spot, pretty much. I tell you, actually, let's just get this straight. You hear loads of people in the independent dance music scene saying, hey, I've just signed somebody. It's a load of bollocks, actually. All you've done is you've just got one track off them for about 50 quid, okay? So this isn't long-term 10-year deals we're doing here. You just sign a couple of tracks, maybe. So I signed a couple of tracks from Rod and Marl, and we all got on, and they came and played parties for us, and it was a nice little seedbed of music. And then Lazy Dog I still think I was still doing some parties with Jay as Lazy Dog at the time. We were doing one in Miami, and Justin Martin's brother came up to me in a club in Miami and handed me a CD. And this was when they were kids. Like, I think Justin was 18 at the time or something. And I didn't even listen to it. I just put it in my bag. And about 2 weeks later, I was just going through all my, Miami stuff and put it on. And that little piano riff of the sad piano came on. I thought, oh, wow, that's good. And I just emailed the address that was scribbled on the disc and got hold of Justin. So those, and I think that was the core of the label in the first year, Rod and Marl and Justin Martin, probably.
So these days, how is most of the music found for the label? I mean, you obviously, is it sort of, do people actually physically hand you stuff over when you see them, or is it mainly sort of online, just from all over the world, sort of SoundCloud based, or what's the main?
I think
way?
The thing that I find quite extraordinary is I think a lot of people just think that Buzzing Fly is probably well stitched up for music. There's no route in. Ben's probably got it all mapped out for the next 3 years. Don't even think about it. But honestly, I make decisions on releases on a whim. If I just hear something, I'll put it out. There is no game plan at the label. I don't have any schedule going forward. I don't even know. Well, John knows what the next release is because he's doing the artwork for it next week. But beyond that, I don't know what the release will be after that. And if someone in this room were to give me a good track and I went home tonight, there's a fair chance I put it out by the summer.
Hear that, everyone? Okay, it's a competition.
Seriously, and that's how I feel the label should be. It's very fluid. It's more of a kind of, as I say, I still see it, as a kind of fanzine project. That I just do it for the love of it. I hear tracks I like. I try and get them out really quickly because I believe in the freshness of dance music. I hate all these top-line DJs, and they run labels and they snaffle up tracks and, let me live with it, I'll get back to you, or let me have it, and they'll sit on it for 18 months and it never comes out. I think that's bullshit, basically. So
no, fair enough. Buzzing Fly has straddled an interesting time, hasn't it, in terms of the industry? Particularly in dance, I guess, because there's this, the general move, large-scale move from vinyl. Yet you still have, you still deal with vinyl in certain respects. How has that changed, and what does vinyl mean to you in as far as the label's concerned?
Well, it's, I think it's something that you just do for the love now. I don't think no one's under any illusions now what the sales of vinyl are like. I think it's sort of turning into the new Northern Soul, if you like. It's for collectors and lovers, and I think that there are two ways of looking at vinyl. You look at it as a DJ tool, and you can look at it from as a collector's point of view. From the DJ tool point of view, there are very, very few clubs that you can walk into that will have a decent set of decks, a decent set of cartridges, a well set up system that'll even let you play vinyl anymore. So I think we are definitely heading down the road of CDs moving into Ableton, moving into Traktor, Serato, blah, 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 thumb drives full of your entire library of music. I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere down the line we'll actually be able to fast stream music straight off a server in clubs. We won't even need to take our collection down. We'll just stick a hot wire,
cloud-based,
basically, and you'll just have the infinite, history of music. How boring would that be, honestly? Jesus, I like putting 70 records in a bag.
Won't that encourage people, though? In you talk about sort of the way Buzzing Fly started. Won't that encourage people to then go, right? It's almost like the original meaning of house music. You make your tune for that night.
Yeah.
And maybe it could encourage a whole scene revolved around that.
Well, possibly.
I don't know.
But I think anyway, that's another, I think, another discussion. But I do think in terms of vinyl as a DJ tool, it really is, there's a kind of hard wax community now who specialise in it. I admire them to bits, and I still provide music for them. But it is a small community. And then there's the collector's side. And obviously Buzzing Fly has had an aspect to it, which has been for collectors. I always wanted right from day one for the artwork to be, unusual, different, not the kind of stuff you get, on a house record particularly. And that served us well, and I think a lot of people, do buy our stuff because it looks nice too. So,
I mean, can you transfer that idea of a kind of a product in terms of vinyl and the packaging and like a beauty of that, I guess, into the digital age? I mean, there's something. Can you kind of label, kind of impose that on its kind of digital product? Is there any way of doing that?
I think it's very hard. I mean, I think your artwork's obviously reduced to the size of a postage stamp. Okay, you can provide digital booklets and PDFs, but has anyone ever really looked at one? Bought an album from iTunes, do you really read through the digital PDF? Who's interested? It's nonsense, isn't it? Forget it. But I do think there is a place for lovingly packaged artwork, deluxe editions of music for people who want it. I think I was talking to somebody the other day, and we were saying, it makes no sense in a way that you get an artist as big as, say, Lady Gaga, and then you get a smaller artist like, maybe someone like Other Lives or Wooden Ships or one of these kind of like, emerging indie bands. You shouldn't have to charge the same amount of money for each project. Why not charge more for the Other Lives album in a lovingly packaged sleeve? For a specialist audience who are prepared to pay that amount of money for it. Yes, provide it. That's one little platform of sales, if you're looking at it from a business point of view, that you can do. Perhaps even pre-sell them up front. Get the orders in. Tell people what's coming. 6 months' time, it's the new album from this band that you really love. They're not like anybody else. Let's get the orders in and we'll do it. Use Kickstarter. Does anyone use Kickstarter for anything? It's an amazing site where you can it's like a pledge site. And you can start up any business you like, from a debut album to a piece of, say, 3D plastic printing. Like, I just read 2 articles online the other day about a guy who raised $10,000 to get his first album off the ground and market it and put it out around the world. And I read somebody who'd raised $1 million on Kickstarter for 3D plastic printing. So, it's really interesting, Kickstarter, and I think it's a very strong concept. And if you don't reach the target that you're asking, all the money goes back to the people who pledged. It's as simple as that. If you want to raise £1,000, if you only get to 990 quid and it peters out, they get the money back. So, but it's interesting,
That's an interesting idea. That, I guess, brings us on to the idea of, the digital age in terms of, in relation to music. And what are your thoughts as a label owner on the way in which digital music, what music is going, really, and what's going to happen over the next 5 years? And I think in particular stress on the value of music to people in terms of, how much it's worth and how much people should pay for music as well.
Well, it's where do you start, really? I think we're going to have to get used to the fact that in terms of the music that we buy, that sort of throttle that certain areas of the music industry had on the distribution chain is gone. You can't. Those sort of bricks and mortar shops that were controlled by major labels, keeping the prices high, a select amount of artists, of course that's gone. But I think what we're going to have to get used to is actually almost the complete opposite, which is a massive, massive delta of small platforms providing music, all paying micro payments, micro royalties across the board. And I think this is the way we're going to have to get used to it. It's not in place yet, But I do think that that's the way it's going to have to be. And if I had any advice in terms of getting a job in the music industry now, become an accountant, okay? Because that is where the money is going to be. I certainly know from my experience at Buzzing Fly, the most amount of work that we do on anything compared to what we did when we first started is accounting. It is so boring. When we first started, you would get like a spreadsheet from your distributor. There'd be 70 line items showing the 70 countries where we'd sold a few 12 inches. We could do it in an afternoon, bang the royalties out. It now takes us about 3 weeks. Every month, we get up to 7,000 line items on a spreadsheet of where we're selling music, down to 0.001p for a stream of Lone Cat in Iceland on Nokia. And I'm thinking, I don't even need that money. Do I? And what I'm doing is I'm spending pounds on accountants to get back pennies, you know. And I think this is one of the problems that we're all agonizing about at the moment. How can there be a future in digital if it seems to be paying so little? But I do think we can't get away from the fact that this future is upon us now. This delta of digital payment is upon us. And we just have to get the system organized where almost osmotically, every time we hear music in the future, whether it's in a Starbucks, in a pub, on our iPhone, we're getting paid small amounts of money, and it is being calculated somewhere by a new collecting agency. You know, perhaps if we create a new global database, repertoire database, a new independent body along the lines of PRS or PPL is set up to oversee this. I don't know how we're going to do it, but it's going to have to happen. And we are all going to get paid, but in a very different way to how we get paid now.
I mean, because I think that there's a particular concern, probably for the audience, I mean, or people involved in the dance scene, is that there's all this talk these days of saying, you know, well, you need to go out and perform live. You know, that's, you know, it's all right if you're a band, but if you're, you know, if you're even a very good producer or bedroom producer who makes great tracks at home, what are you going to do? Do you then have to get a whole group of people around you and start doing live things? I mean, what's the solution there?
Tell me where the money is in live if you're starting out. Anyone make any money from a gig? A lot of the people I know, to get a gig in London, you have to pay the promoter to get on the bill. You know, you're getting 50 quid and you've got 4 in the band, you've got petrol. It's an impossibility. It's okay if you're playing 1,000 seaters plus and you've, you know, maybe got a bit of a following, but it's a myth that the money's in live. Not at the bottom, it isn't.
I mean, coming back to the label idea then, I mean, if someone in the audience wants to set up a label, I guess, as I say before, you kind of straddle this, moving from vinyl into digital to a certain extent. How do you set yourself up as a label now? And is it worth doing that if you're an artist? I mean, should you have your own label or should you approach other labels?
I think the other thing that's, I think, a problem is simply competition. I just think as the barriers for making music and distributing music have come down, more and more people have been able to get in and do it. There's just that much more of it around. And there's only so many hours in the day for us as consumers to listen to it. Now, on one level, it's an incredibly good thing. I think giving a chance to more than, you know, the average amount of people to make music is fantastic. And I have nothing against that at all. It keeps you on your toes. You've got to make good stuff. But that's where the crux of it lies. You have to make good, different stuff to stand out now. There's no point whining about, you know, God, there's so much shit out there. You know, you go at Beatport and you can't get past the Croatian, you know, techno records to find out what you want to hear anyway. You've got to get past them somehow, you know, or you've got to make records that stand out above them because they're not going to go away, you know. So there's that side of it, which I think we've got to get used to. I've lost my thread, actually. What was the question?
No, it's more about how, if someone's here as an artist and they're thinking of setting up a label or they just want to set up a label, yeah. How do you know, coming back to, I mentioned about the sort of day one of Buzzing Fly, what would their sort of day one be?
Well, I mean, anyone can pat themselves on the back tomorrow and say, I've started a label, because it's incredibly easy. You know, it's very easy to set up a website, a social network, you know, get some digital tracks out there, you know, tell your mum you've started a label, fantastic. But you're not going to get anywhere you're just going to get swamped by everyone else who's out there. So just do something different is the first thing I'd say. Just, try and make a stand in some way, because, yeah, you can flatter yourself if you want and say, I've got a label. But, if no one, if a tree falls in the forest, it's that old one, isn't it? So
you could be in your bedroom with a label and nothing happens. I mean, so what's the future now for Buzzing Fly?
Well, I actually went through quite a sort of a very gloomy period before Christmas, and I actually did think that I might actually slow the label right down. I just felt it was taking up too much of my time, and not enough was happening that was pleasing me. I've wound down my live DJing recently, and I'm just trying to spend more time at home with the family and this kind of stuff. I was getting sick of getting on planes at weekends and all that kind of thing. And I was planning to sort of wind it down and just keep it as a little background project. But somehow I got after Christmas and I thought, no, I can't. I love it too much. And again, John thought he had some room in his diary because they weren't going to make any more releases. But the next thing he knows, he's had to do 2 sleeves in the last couple of weeks. So there are a couple of records coming out. And of course, we're doing Tracy's stuff. Tracy Thorne's stuff through Strange Feeling, which is Buzzing Fly's sister label. So that keeps us busy as well. But, I also trying to find some time myself to get back to making music myself. I've spent a bit too long behind a desk.
Would that be kind of house or dance based, or do you have a sort of hankering to go into kind of large scale sort of jazz orchestration or something like that?
I think I've done that one as well. I don't know. I mean, ironically, I was in this very building about 3 weeks ago, in this room just behind us here, doing a course on Pro Tools, which is a software I've never ever learned. I've known how to use Logic and I've learned Ableton, but I haven't known Pro Tools. And I thought, well, I'll teach myself a new discipline, and it might bring me some new ideas. And I was the youngest in the room by about 30 years, I think. It was quite funny. And I was in there with my glasses on, like trying to work out what was going on. But my intention this year is to spend some more time in the studio and actually, create something different. It's like I was saying, I kind of feel it's very easy to put out adequate music these days. It's quite easy to get a little coterie around you who will support that. But if we're talking about making a living out of music, it's got to go beyond that, or you're just making it for your mates. That's fine if that's all you want to do. But really, it's a bit like vanity publishing, isn't it, in a way? So my attitude is actually, I want to go away for a bit and try and dream up something a bit different again. Not quite sure what it is. If I get there, I'll let you know.
Come back next time and you can let us know. How on earth do you combine, I guess, working with family? Over a large number of years. It must be very difficult to try and combine those things together. And also, I guess, like you say, being a DJ, you're flying off and running a label, with kids, and working with your wife as well. Is that very, very difficult, or does it just work?
I don't know. It's just my life, and I think we all just adapt. We're like sort of, creatures who go from the sea to the land. It's what I've always done. It's the problem that the gentleman DJ faces. I'm no spring chicken. And, if you have got kids and a family and that sort of thing going on, then, yeah, that is a tug at the same time, unfortunately. Because
there is there's the generation of DJs who, I guess, kind of came of age with late 80s kind of house music kind of scene, and there are a number of, some have fallen by the wayside, clearly, but there was some are still DJing, and it's kind of that, at what point, the question I suppose was asked of rock stars, when do you kind of retire?
Well, my feeling has always been, you should do it if you're feeling it, and I just got to a point where I wasn't feeling it very much towards middle of last year. So I thought, well, look, rather than kid people, I'm going to stop for a bit, and it'll probably rekindle itself in me, and I'll come back, because I hate standing in clubs about to start a set and wishing I wasn't there. And I was starting to feel that, and I thought, this is stupid. And, I'd rather just not play and disappoint people than fake it. So, yeah.
Sort of, we're kind of getting near the end now, but I'm just wondering, what of all the tracks or songs you've ever been involved in, which do you think is the one you're kind of most proud of? And would one of those make it onto your kind of, your desert island discs, should you be asked?
I remember when we put together a sort of best of Everything But the Girl about 10 years ago. It was called Like the Deserts Miss the Rain, and it was meant to be Ben and Tracy's selection of our favourite moments, and it could be B-sides, it could be remixes. And we were besieged with people saying, God, this must be the hardest decision of your life. And to be honest with you, I have struggled to find 16 to fill up the CD with. I really did, and I'm always got reservations about almost everything I do.
Do you think that's the artistic burden?
Well, of course it is. I mean, did anyone see that Lucy and Freud program last night? Anyone watching that? I caught the end of it, and he was saying how the moment of starting a painting, everything seems just possible. It feels like you're going to invest this artistic moment with something so deep and so meaningful, and just it's going to blow everything else out. Well, he didn't actually, because Lucy and Freud doesn't say blow everything else out of the water, but that was sort of like, what he was implying. But as you get more and more into finishing the painting, towards the end you just realise that it's actually just a painting. And I think that is the thing that we all feel when we create something, that you go in with it with the best intentions, but often it comes out as just a small work of art,
Well, on that note, are there any particular tracks or songs that you have been in the studio or you sat down and written and you just think that's got something? Are there any particular sort of standout moments?
Yeah, no, I think that every day. That's the whole point. As long as you retain that enthusiasm when you start, and I'm constantly sitting down at the piano thinking, right, yes, those 3 chords, that's it. It's the Holy Grail. I have found the song that will beat missing. Actually, I never think that, but it's important to retain that sort of enthusiasm for it, and also to have a network of supporters around you who, encourage you to go the extra mile and finish it off, and collaborators or people whose ears you trust. I actually was writing a song the other day. And I've been struggling to write songs recently, but I wrote something that I quite liked. And my daughter was in the room. She was the only other person in the house. She's 14. And I thought, why not? I'll try it on her. And I just tried the first 8 bars on her. And she went, oh, that's nice, Dad. And I thought, well, that was enough to make me want to carry on working on it the next day. Do you know what I mean? So sometimes you just have to egg yourself on to get through to the end.
Great. Okay, that's brilliant. So thank you very much. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.